So, yay. I'm so excited that you're here with us today, Niki. I know that we had a few cross problems with scheduling last week, which is, it happens. I mean, we are living very busy lives. We're just so grateful that you are able to be with us today and bring all of your great information to us. I want to do a proper introduction of you. Niki Gratrix is an award-winning nutritional therapist, bioenergetic practitioner, and mind-body expert, helping people to optimize energy. In 2005, she co-founded one of the largest mind-body clinics in integrative medicine in the UK, with patients in 35 countries, which is amazing, where she worked as director of nutrition until 2010. The clinic specialized in treating chronic fatigue syndrome, won the award for outstanding practice in 2009, and later established a preliminary study in 2012 on its results with patients in the British Medical Journal Open. In August 2015, she hosted the largest ever free online health summit on overcoming fatigue, interviewing 29 world-leading experts on optimizing energy with over 30,000 attendees. That's insane. There's more information about her at the Abundant Energy Summit, also at her website, which I will be sharing in the replay. So welcome, Niki. So happy again that you're here with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your patience with sorting out time zones, like US time zones, which I'm still getting used to.
I know, I do the same thing.
Wonderful. Shall we get stuck in?
Let's do it. I'm going to go ahead and just let everybody know, again, reminder, if you are new to Zoom, you can put questions in the Q&A. And then you can also put them in the chat. If they're in the Q&A, then we have a little bit more control over answering and things like that. But again, if it's easier for you in chat, I'll be watching that as well. Probably going to hold the questions till the very end so that Niki can stay on track, and just let her take the reins. Go for it.
Great. Thank you so much, Carmen. Yeah, so I've got quite a lot of information to share today, so I might be going quite fast, but a lot of it's just data, which is very important information. So, and yeah, good to keep questions to the end, just because I can't see them either, so it'll be distracting.
Yep.
Wonderful. Okay, so yeah, I'll answer all questions at the end, which should be awesome. So we're going to be talking about stress as it relates to health, but we're going to be talking about a specific type of stress that is probably the most underexposed risk factor when it comes to health and long-term, living a long life and having a healthy life. So I'm going to talk about early life stress. So it's stress that happens in childhood. And these are called, when we have a stressful event that happens to us in childhood, this is called an adverse childhood event. And the researchers are calling that ACEs, an ACE, adverse childhood event, so that everyone's clear. So if you have like a high exposure to ACEs in childhood, you have a dramatic increased risk of 7 out of the top 10 causes of death. And 67% of all adults have been exposed. And of that group, 80% had been exposed to more than one. Now, if you consider things like gluten sensitivity, a maximum of about 20% of adults actually have that, whereas 67% is epic. It's an epic amount of people who've been exposed. If you have ACEs in childhood, you have a 6-fold increased risk of illnesses like chronic fatigue syndrome. And for example, people with 6 ACEs have a 20-year reduction in lifespan compared to people with 0 ACEs. So this is it's a gigantic underexposed area. So where did I get that data from? It's actually from this study. This is probably one of the most important studies that's been done in medicine, and it just doesn't get talked about enough, which is why I'm out there on the platform putting this out there. So this study is called the ACEs study, and it's basically it was done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, it's this Center for Disease Control in the USA. They surveyed people who replied. 17,500 adults replied to the survey. That study was done in 1998. It triggered a ton of studies afterwards. And they were the first ones to come up and say, hey, we should start looking at adverse childhood events and correlate it with illness in adulthood. So in that study, it's important to understand what were the categories that they said counted as an ACE, and they came up with 10 categories. So this is what they were assessing for. It was parents separating or divorce, that's an ACE, physical, sexual or emotional abuse, physical and emotional neglect, domestic violence, mental illness in the family, substance abuse or incarceration by a related family member. So if you have one of those, you can have a maximum of 10 based on those study results. So essentially, here's some of the other statistics that came out of that original study. If you had just 4 ACEs, you have an increased relative risk of things like chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, 2.5 times higher than people with 0 ACEs. Hepatitis risk, 2.5 times higher. Depression, 4.5 times higher. Cancer was 2.5, diabetes 1.6, stroke was 2.6. Being suicidal was 12 times higher, which is pretty major. If you had 8 ACEs, you have triple the risk of lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of heart disease, the top 2 killers in the West. So this is bigger than like toxins. This is bigger than diet. This is bigger than smoking. You know, it's gigantic and it's a hidden crisis. So Dr. Felitti and Dr. Robert Ander, the original researchers, came back in 2009 to do a huge study on autoimmune diseases. This was like 17,000 people again. If you had just 2 ACEs, you have a 70% increased risk of illnesses like Th1 dominant conditions, autoimmune conditions, and Th2 conditions listed there on the right. You had just 2 ACEs, you have an 80% increased risk. Not many people realize the correlation of autoimmunity risk in women with ACEs is as strongly linked as smoking and lung cancer, and which is incredible. Autoimmunity is a female dominant illness. And it's interesting that you are 50% more likely to have ACEs if you're a woman, because unfortunately women are more abused in childhood than men. There could be a correlation there, which is interesting. Here's some other statistics, just the links. You know, if for mental health, if you had 4 ACEs, you were over 4 times more likely, if you had 4 ACEs, to develop Alzheimer's and dementia in adulthood, which is incredible. This was a 28,000 person survey, again sponsored by the CDC, done by the California Department of Public Health. Which is crazy. I talk about chronic fatigue was my background. It's the clinic that I co-founded. What's interesting is that really chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, those related illnesses, people with adrenal fatigue, which is like the less severe form of chronic fatigue, that these illnesses are like the poster children for ACEs. So if you have ACEs in childhood, you have this is the original 2006 study. They were looking at 43 cases of chronic fatigue. They found that you have a 3 to 8-fold increased risk if you have ACEs in childhood. And then they came back and said, well, let's double the size of the study and really see if that's right. And they came back, double the size, 113 people with CFS, 6-fold increased risk. Exposure to childhood trauma is associated with 6-fold increased risk of CFS. So if you have ACEs, very large correlation. Anybody with fatigue, burnout, adrenal fatigue, chronic fatigue, and those related things like fibromyalgia. So this is how I got into studying the ACEs kind of research, because I couldn't work with chronic fatigue patients effectively without understanding the psychology which was going on. And we'll talk more about how it happens. There's another study. This is so that people, if they want to, I'm a study science person. If everything I say I try and back up with science, so if people want that, if you're a science bird, here's the paper. You know, it just shows that, you know, this isn't made up out of thin air. It's not kind of a Louise Hay heal your life thing. Right. This is hardcore science. Yeah.
Yes.
Big. Linked with obesity, here was a study of over 110,000 people. If you have moderate levels of ACEs in childhood, you have a 34% increased level of obesity. Severe abuse, you're 50% more likely to be obese in adulthood. Huge study. So I want to just go through why, when they said 67% of adults have been exposed, it was an underestimate. That was actually an underestimated figure. And even the researchers themselves had said, look, we've missed ACEs. So I've talked on so many events on ACEs, and people are emailing me all the time saying, is this an ACE? Is this an ACE? And I'm like, yeah, yes, you know. And so the researchers they did the study by mistake. They didn't know what they were going to find. They were shocked. They were actually very upset. The researchers cried when they found the results because they didn't expect it, and it was a hidden crisis, and they were so shocked by it. And so they just chose 10 categories where they knew there was research already in the published literature. So they also ignored things like intergenerationally inherited trauma. So also certain sensitive types, and they also ignored something called covert trauma, or what we call silent ACEs. Just in a little more detail, things like this, missed ACEs. Even the researchers were like, yeah, bullying, being a victim under the age of 18 years of bullying, racism, homophobia, physical trauma requiring hospitalization is incredibly traumatizing for young children. Witnessing violence, death of a caregiver, traumatic birth, huge. If you had a traumatic birth, that's going to impact your psychology and physiology for a lifetime. Things like obviously financial crisis, homelessness, natural disasters. So yes, these all count. The studies out there showing that third generation survivors of the Holocaust victim have the same physiological and psychological symptoms as their grandparents who were in the Holocaust. And you'll find that across the world where there's been war and famine, the offspring have the same signs of the trauma. And it's sort of, in some areas it's controversial, it shouldn't be. Here's a hardcore mainstream study showing that when you take if you traumatize a male mouse, the sperm changes. You can take, I call it the traumatized sperm, you can inject that into healthy female mice, into the eggs of healthy eggs, and the progeny, the offspring, has the same traumatic expression and signs of behavioral change and metabolic changes. So it's not bad parenting. They managed to rule that out bad parenting because they gave it to a healthy mum. So it's epigenetically being passed down. This is through the male side. It's also can happen through the female side as well. So trauma is passed on, it changes, and we think the DNA kind of goes to zero again. It doesn't. Some of that information will stay, and it's multiple progeny, like offspring, that will be affected. This is just very interesting. Certain people are more or less resilient than others. What traumatizes one person may not traumatize another. Mm-hmm. It's not so much about the ACE itself. It's your resilience as a child. If you have somebody around you that is supporting you as a child when something bad happens, because it can happen. Obviously, it can be a mitigating factor. And that ACE, we know people have had loads of ACEs, right? And they're healthy, happy adults and very successful. So that will go off in a second. So one of the types of people where that's the opposite is true is what we call the highly sensitive types. And there's it looks like there's about up to 15% of the population have certain genes that make them more likely to have a stress response and bounce back more slowly. So one is called the sensitivity gene, that's 5-HTT-LPR. It's very interesting from a nutritional perspective to know about these highly sensitive genes. And the other one called the stress vulnerability gene, NR3C1. It means in response to stress, you'll have a higher level of cortisol for longer. The 5-HTT-LPR one is about serotonin metabolism, and you're less likely to bounce back as fast. So, there's a highly sensitive population that are going to be traumatized more easily, and their biology is going to change more easily. So they didn't really take that into account either.
I'm one of those people. I'm the HSP.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I think, but you could do a nutritional bypass. There's things you could do to modulate that nutritionally, isn't there? Which is where it gets very interesting. But I think a lot of chronic fatigue patients have probably got those genes going on. There isn't enough research to confirm that yet, so they're looking into it now. But so that's an interesting area. But the other area I just want to lastly cover was these what I call silent ACEs, or covert trauma. And this is an area where I've just sort of done a lot more research, because it's like blockbusting statistics, once again just being ignored by sort of the mainstream and so on. So one of the issues is two of the questions in the ACEs question are asking about emotional neglect and emotional abuse. And a lot of people are going to answer no to that, because they don't know how to self-report that they've been abused, especially if they've experienced attachment trauma. It's also called developmental trauma. So attachment trauma occurs in the first 1,000 days between conception and age 2. And it's basically where mum doesn't bond with baby, or mum or the caregiver doesn't bond with baby, okay? And it's pre-cognitive time. Up to the age of 2, there's no thinking memory. Memory is implicit. It becomes emotionally stored. But it's very hard. How can a baby kind of, did you have attachment trauma? How are you meant to remember that? So how are people meant to report it? It's also, attachment trauma is not a discrete incident. Like, it's not like one thing that happens where, a case of being physically battered or something where you were sexually abused. It's not a discrete incident. It's like a continual relational trauma where there isn't an expression of love coming from the parents. So it's like ambient trauma. So very hard again to kind of, when you're a baby and you have no point of reference. It's just the way it is. You're not going to self-report that. it doesn't qualify as a PTSD diagnosis, because that's things like you have to have an incident that happens that is a threat to your potential threat or an actual threat to your physical life, and sort of well-being. So that it's not true. So the interesting thing is, this is the like unbelievable study. It was actually Dr. Mary Ainsworth. Here's the study. Over 6,000 mother-baby interactions were observed between 1970 to 1999. So this is a blockbuster figure. That was the study. Only 55% of babies have secure attachment.
Oh,
everybody else is insecure or securely attached. I know everybody gets a bit heartbroken when they think about this, but 23% turn out to be avoidance. And with the strange situation studies, they're basically observing mum in a room with a baby and a stranger, and then mum goes out of the room, and then she comes back in, and they observe the baby's behaviour. And with secure babies, the mum leaves, baby cries, baby's upset. When she comes back in, baby kind of cries, clings to mum calms baby down, and then the toddler goes back to playing. So it's all good. With avoidance, and 23% avoidance, mum leaves and she comes back in, and baby doesn't notice either way. She might as well be a stranger. And the researchers found that mum's not expressing emotional love, and she's rejecting 23% of all adults. The other 22% have an ambivalent or disorganized response. So mum comes back in the room, baby clings to her, baby's angry, kind of anxious, and just doesn't calm down, just can't calm down. So you could call this the anxious type. So 2017, it's probably 50% of adults are unable to create secure, happy, loving relationships in adulthood, because how you attach as a child, that imprinting before age 2 affects how you're going to have your adult major relationships as well. Here's confirming that Mary Ainsworth's graduate student Mary Main created what's called the adult attachment interviews. So between 25 years up to 2010,000 adult attachment interviews were done.
Wow.
And again, they found 23% were dismissing, that's the avoidant types, 19% were the occupied, anxiously attached. This study was amazing because they were interviewing adults, and they could be 85% accurate by just interviewing the adult. They could predict what the adults, their own childhood attachment with their own child was. So they'd fill out the questionnaire and say, okay, you've got a child, we reckon you have an anxiously attached child. 80% accurate based on these studies. So, the brain develops in a social context, and the brain is impacted and changed biologically by that interaction with the other. Self as changed by the other. And we even have mirror neurons that actually create the physiological processes in the brain. So an insecure attachment changes brain function, and it will also change psychology as well. So and it will affect the epigenetics, how the brain is expressing epigenetically through a lifetime. And this is why, even though we might not remember we were traumatized with attachment trauma, our body does remember, and our psychology remembers. So this is Bessel van der Kolk's book. He's the world leading expert in trauma. His book is The Body Keeps the Score.
I have
what you may not remember, but your body does. Yeah, time does not heal, it conceals.
Yeah.
Here's this amazing work that Bessel van der Kolk did, looking at over 40,000 children nationally being treated for multiple traumas. Most of them do not meet the criteria for PTSD, as the majority of issues are not specific traumas, but issues in their attachment relationships. This is really important why I focused on the attachment side. What does attachment trauma lead to? It leads to developmental trauma in a younger growing child, which results in things like core shame, lack of feelings of self-love, problems with mood and attention, difficulties regulating emotions and self-soothing. Somebody who's going to be prone to stress responses the rest of their life. A loss of resilience in adulthood to stresses that are going to happen inevitably in adulthood. Self-destructive behavior, it leads to narcissism and codependent relationships in your romantic relationships, mental health problems. And I've just put a summary there of PTSD symptoms, which are not the same as developmental trauma symptoms. And this is where the majority of our patients and our clients, they're going to be somewhere in that category, a self-destructive behavior because they can't stop smoking, or they can't stop binge eating, or they can't stop overworking, and they're not taking care of their own health needs. it's so amazing if you start to realize that this could have come from an attachment trauma. So you need to go like that deep to get to say, you could help people to realize like, wow, this is something that's happened to me. And the main thing is it's not their fault. You see, the shame thing, shame begets shame, right? So if you suddenly go, this all came because you were age 2 and look, you've got all the signs and symptoms, and then they go, wow, it wasn't my fault, and I just thought I was a defective person all this time. It's because mum never gave me love, and that when if mum doesn't bond with baby feels abandoned, and the natural thing is if the baby feels abandoned, it goes, there must be something wrong with me. That's where so much human suffering comes from, which is why I've spent time on it. Just as an aside, relationships, landmark study 2004, over 300,000 participants, social support was a stronger predictor of survival than physical activity, body mass index, hypertension, air pollution, alcohol consumption, even smoking 15 cigarettes a day. There was another study I found, a meta-analysis over 25 years of all the studies of social isolation and loneliness. It basically causes a 30% increased risk of mortality. So, when we're looking at clients and we're kind of considering their diet and we're looking at their exercise choices, like, first of all, like, how was the childhood? And that's going to impact how they're responding to stress now. And if they've got destructive relationships in their life now. And toxic people are as bad as a bad diet, or as bad as not exercising. I agree. So if you have, it's this is the studies, like it's not even debatable. It's like right here. So I just mentioned assessing attachment trauma here is difficult. You can't get it in 2 questions. The adult attachment interview takes 75 minutes to do, 10 hours to transcribe, 4 hours to assess. So the ACEs questionnaire was too superficial to pick up that. But I'll go, the last part of the talk, I'll go into what kind of questionnaires you could use with clients.
Great.
So there's the burgeoning area of research now looking at like attachment style as a child and your response to stress in adulthood. So obviously if you're an anxiously attached type, you tend to have higher cortisol responses to both relationship stresses and standard acute adult stresses, like, anything, public speaking, this kind of thing. Sort of the narcissist kind, which is kind of linking with the dismissive or avoidant types, also have been found to have high cortisol because they're stressed as well. Actually, the little babies, the avoidance and the anxiety types, were found to have high kind of cortisol and high heart rates. So they were both stressed. Even the avoidant type was as well. So this can change the epigenetics. The science of psychoneuroimmunology really shows, there's robust findings that there's a strong correlation between healthy close person relationships and immune function. If you have a conflictual relationship, destructive things happening, if you're codependent, don't have good social abilities, essentially you've got increased inflammatory markers, and it links with all those chronic complex illnesses. So bottom line of all of that, I spent a bit longer talking about attachment trauma these days than I used to last year, because I just came across the blockbusting research. Bottom line, everyone you see who you're coaching is going to be impacted by ACEs. Whether it was the mum had an ACE, even if she goes back into her own, looks at the questionnaire, probably missed it, may not be able to self-report attachment trauma. Parents, grandparents in Europe, who didn't have a grandparent involved with the war, and it'll be the same with grandparents and so on in other parts of the world. So next session, looking at next bit now, what are the mechanisms? So how does this childhood trauma sort of change, childhood biography become adult biology, if you like? About 3 main mechanisms. It's kind of important to us so you know how to reverse it. So it's very important that if you've had ACEs in childhood, you've had a rough childhood, you're definitely going to have an increased risk of destructive health patterns. We're going to try and do destructive health patterns to distract us from our core feelings of shame, our inability to calm ourselves and feel okay about us. The fact that we might have social skills and all the rest of it. So what do? Is we go and do destructive health patterns to numb the feelings. So this is the core of addiction. So if you've got sort of 4 ACEs or more, you're more than 10 times as likely to use injection drugs. If you have 4 ACEs, more than 7 times as likely to be an alcoholic. These are the massive 28,000 person survey. Almost 3 times as likely to be a current smoker. 3 times as likely to engage in binge drinking. More than 3 times as likely to engage in risky sexual behavior. So this is one mechanism, obviously, of how ACEs in childhood link with all those massive correlates with chronic complex illness and life reduction as an adult. But the same study also found you could have normal cholesterol, normal weight, not smoke, not drink, not be a diabetic, and still have a 360% increased risk of heart disease if you had 7 ACEs. So if you were leading a healthy lifestyle, like all that external stuff, is all good, and yet you could still drop dead, 360% increased risk of heart disease with 7 ACEs. What's happening? Okay, what's going on is we have to get into the biochemistry. They found the same thing with lung cancer, by the way, as well. Huge study here. So the biochemistry of early life stress, this was a famous study on epigenetics that people might remember if they're into the nutrition thing. So it was the Guti mice, and those are Guti mice, their little picture. You got the big fat yellow one, and you've got the little healthy brown mouse. They're both same species. The difference is the mom with the brown mice, sort of offspring. She was given methyl donors as a part of her diet, so things like B12, choline, and things like that. And it changed the gene expression of the offspring such that her offspring lived for longer, didn't have diabetes, wasn't obese, and had nice brown fur. In the agouti mice that don't get a methyl-rich, donor-rich diet with mum's diet, they turn out like the big yellow one. Unfortunately, that one is obese, it's overweight. They tend to die from cancer and heart disease and things like that faster. So that's how much diet can impact epigenetic expression. That was the landmark study. So a couple of researchers came together and said, if diet and chemicals could create these kind of epigenetic changes, could human behavior in childhood neglect and severe early stress change epigenetics in brain neurons? So the answer was yes. And this was Michael Meany and Mo Sheaf, working at McGill University in Montreal, 2004. This is kind of landmark studies, working with rats originally. And they found that the type and amount of nurturing a mother rat provides in the early weeks of the rat's infancy determines how that rat responds to stress in later life. And there's a bit more sort of for the science tech people, but essentially rat pups that receive a less nurturing upbringing are more sensitive to stress throughout their lifespan. It's to do with the glucocorticoid receptors, which is the top end of where the HPA axis starts, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the stress system. That becomes unique. The threshold of what causes you to have a stress response lowers, and when you have a stressor, the stress response goes on for longer, and it's permanently reset by an epigenetic shift triggered by what's happening in childhood. So this ambient kind of trauma or a one-off shock, like a physical being hit or something like that, can do that, and it essentially will stay that way until there's an intervention. So which is sad. This is all reversible. I'm sort of painting the bad news picture at the moment, but it's all reversible.
We know you have a solution for this.
I know, before we all kind of want to kill ourselves, but okay. So replicated with humans in 2009. So they took the research on rats, were able to replicate it in humans and show that humans who have had ACEs in childhood, high level of ACEs, the expression of the glucocorticoid receptor had shifted. So these people have higher stress response to everything. They also, the researchers went on to say, look, it's like a critical brake is switched off. The child is marinating in stress hormones and inflammatory cytokines from a young age, and they have a lower threshold response to stressors. So, when somebody you see has got autoimmunity or something like that, or, maybe a trigger and they get an autoimmune disease, it actually started at age 2. That autoimmune disease started at age 2. It's just the trigger was later. The same with obesity, and we'll cover more of that in a second as well. By the way, it was just the glucocorticoid receptors that change. It's across the entire genome. Here's the paper. So it basically, early life stress changes genetic expression to increase risk of all the biological processes involved with psychiatric and substance abuse disorders, heart disease, stroke, respiratory disease, and cancer. So it's changing the entire genome towards this inflammatory, unhealthy side.
Yeah.
Here's some studies for people who are interested. Early separating monkeys too soon from mum changes their microflora. Early life stress alters the immunity and the microbiota in rats. So it affects everything. When you change the epigenetics, it's going to change I always sort of, with nutrition people, I also always include something about the gut. It changes the intestinal barrier function, and prenatal stress does as well. So if mum's stressed, depressed, are traumatized and she's carrying a baby, that's being sent to baby, and baby's picking up on that too. Um, linked with Alzheimer's, this kind of chronic stress that gets programmed in makes the microglia, which is the little immune system cells in the brain, go, according to the researchers, berserk, where they start pruning too many of the brain cells. They're meant to do a healthy job of keeping the brain healthy. They go berserk, over prune, and then it leads to things like Alzheimer's and brain disorders. That's where they think the link to there is. Essentially, how this emotional stress is going to affect somebody in adulthood, whether they get autoimmune diseases, or they get a mental illness, or they get kind of cancer or chronic fatigue. It's really just where your genetic, your weak link in your genes are. The commonality is this: the HPA axis is, you're stuck in fight flight, basically, in the stress response chronically, and that's you're not resting, digesting, or detoxifying properly. The whole system's under stress. The weak link will lead to the direction that you personally end up going into in terms of what illness you may manifest. This is just a quick summary, the biochemistry of emotion. This is the vicious cycle of stress. This is the, just for the biochemical people, we'll have a stressor that happens. It's actually the heart rate variability picks up that stress first, nanoseconds before the brain does. There are more afferent nerves going up to the brain than vice versa. So the heart picks up, there's a problem, there's a stress, there's something not right, sends the message to the brain. The amygdala is processing the fear processing center. That becomes programmed into fight flight when it happens from an early age, when the baby's brain is still developing, and that will trigger these cascading responses through the hypothalamus via, speaking to the adrenals via the pituitary, excess cortisol coming out, cortisol too high, and then dropping into the adrenal exhaustion stage, or a chronic sympathetic nervous system, adrenaline pumping out constantly, leads to inflammation, leads to free radicals. This will lead to internal toxicity, internal gut dysbiosis changes, increased toxicity, anxiety, less sleep. Now you've got endogenous, internal sources of stress, which unfortunately the amygdala and the heart will pick up on. And there's the vicious cycle. So something that started externally has now become internal. So if you don't correct the internal stress response that's now triggered, you're in this vicious cycle. So amazing paper for people who are interested with chronic fatigue. Kindling means limbic kindling, which is this amygdala kindling. So stuck in an excitatory program neuronal pathways into fight flight. And he talks about exactly this process, about how that leads to mitochondrial dysfunction and basically myalgic encephalomyelitis, otherwise known as chronic fatigue syndrome. It was a superb paper for anyone who wants to read it in detail. Exposure to kindling, repeated exposure to initially sub-threshold stimulus can eventually lead to threshold limits, resulting in persistent hypersensitivity to the stimulus and ultimately spontaneous behavioral manifestations. So we're talking about that in the context of emotional trauma doing it. That can also be triggered by chemical, electrical, microbial, and physical stresses. So the body doesn't differentiate, very important. You'll be stressed by everything. Okay, and the last little bit on the mechanism about how does childhood autobiography become adult, biology. It's the impact of ACEs on beliefs and identity. And I think your people will be very interested in this little section as well. We have the placebo. 33% of all healing occurs in drug trials now, as we know, due to the magic of the placebo effect. A positive belief that something's going to work for us, leads to that outcome happening, the power of the mind. We also have something called nocebo. So if we have a strong, powerful, unconscious, perhaps, belief that something isn't good for us and that we're going to feel worse and that we don't deserve health, that will be just as powerful.
Yeah,
in the Framingham Heart Study,
right? Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They're going.
It's so true, the power of the mind. In the Framingham Heart Study, women who believe they're prone to heart disease were nearly 4 times as likely to die as women with similar risk factors who didn't believe. So here's the psychology having a major impact again. The problem with ACEs is that we have these unconscious beliefs that actually, if you think especially from attachment trauma, that what comes out of that is core feelings of shame. I'm defective, there's something wrong with me, these kind of things. And unfortunately, it can lead to unconscious belief systems like I don't deserve health. It's not safe to be healthy. Okay, it sounds bizarre, but if you have this unresolved trauma going on, it will sabotage your client's best intentions. And they might be so compliant. You might have given them a ton of recommendations on their diet to do, lifestyle changes, even dealing with current relationships. And I've had so many patients where that was the case, and yet they just weren't getting better. And it's like, you know, if the mind is working against you, like and your you know, your coach as well, you've been compliant with your coach, but it's still not getting the results. It could be that you've got one of these unconscious belief systems. This is one of the most interesting aspects of the ACEs study. It started in an obesity clinic. This is how the ACE study originally started. It was Dr. Felitti, and he was working with weight loss clients. They were doing really well. You know, people were losing weight. It was going fantastic. But then he had a 55% dropout rate. And he was like, why are we doing so well? And then suddenly, you know, people are dropping out. And what was happening is as patients were losing weight, they were getting more and more anxious, and it was just not good. So we decided to investigate, and then found out by mistake that a lot of the people trying to lose weight reported having had experienced sexual abuse in childhood. And one woman who was interviewed kind of summed it up, and she said being fat was a protection mechanism. It protected against unwanted attention. So this is where emotional trauma, you know, that person, they don't just need to be told what to eat. They don't need a diet plan. It's not going to work if losing weight is a threat to that person's very existence. For that person, weight loss is danger. So, you know, we've got, how many weight loss clients are we dealing with where we're not asking about the subjective state of the patient? It's crazy. So this is how you'll want to dig into this, you know, carefully, sensitively, and compassionately, and, you know, establish that this could be totally sabotaging something that the client's trying to achieve. This is another thing that we use in the clinic with chronic fatigue syndrome, and all those people who are stressed and fatigued and tired on that whole spectrum. We were able to identify certain personality types that were particularly prone to fatigue and burnout. I'm not sure if you're aware of the Enneagram system, but achiever types. Okay, so achiever types, anxiety types, giver types, perfectionists. If you go back to attachment trauma, the achiever type essentially didn't get unconditional love as a child, and got the message that the only way they could just feel love is if they earned it through doing things. So you're now, attachment trauma means you're not unconditionally loved. If you get unconditional love and you don't have attachment trauma, you don't become your job. Your whole identity and well-being and self-worth isn't tied up with what you do. So anxiety types go straight to that type of attachment trauma. Very interesting, the giver types. This is I love talking about the giver types because loads of therapists and coaches and moms are giver types. They love helping other people. So many of them had attachment trauma, didn't get the love, the unconditional love. They learned the only way they could get love was by giving and helping mum or dad, or helping the other people. And so they end up having to give to other people to earn love back. This leads to them not taking care of themselves. They don't put boundaries in place. They're rescuing everybody all around them all the time. Their sort of very existence kind of depends on it, which is why they can also get obligating. They can get obligating other people. You know, I've done this for you, I've done that for you. I'm doing, you know, give me love back, give you love back. It's like, okay, it can get very conditional because they don't feel unconditional self-love. Is this making sense?
Codependency to an extreme, right?
Exactly. Perfectionist. I fell into the perfectionist type. This is the type where this group have been told they don't have unconditional love. You only get love if you do things right. If you do it wrong, you're bad. So it was a judgment of like, so now my mistakes are I'm defective. Yes. If I don't give to other people, I'm defective. If I don't achieve. So this is why I love the Enneagram system, because it actually is an assessment of why people do what they do, not just behavioral categorization. So most personality types, just typing is just looking at behavioral expression. Whereas we want to get to the core, we want to go deep, we want to go all the way back to who is this person, why are they doing what they do in the world? So this is the other thing with chronic fatigue. Chronic fatigue types, you know, you can't just change their diet and kind of start them to get them on. You have to get them into the ability to rest and relax. But, you know, if you take away the achiever's ability to achieve, or you take away the anxiety type's ability to be anxious about everything, it kind of destroys their identity. And so that's very threatening. And yet, actually, the illness in severe cases will destroy that person's identity, and it's the best thing that could happen. Like, you can no longer be the achiever type because your body is so broken down, unfortunately, that you have to face up to, and then you face it can be very, very painful going through and going, oh my God, now I just feel all the thing I was running away from.
Yes.
So now I can't achieve and get love. Now I feel terrible because all I feel is the nothingness that was there, because that's what I got as a child. But when you're able to say, do you know that was your parents that did that? That's you were never defective, and then you start to work on that level, and it can cause a dramatic shift. So
it's like hitting
the
bottom.
summary is
hit bottom, and then it's almost that emotional bottom where you are left with no coping skills at all. You have to face what's happened so that you can climb out of it and become a different person, right?
Become present.
Yes.
To the fact your beingness, your very essence is unconditional love. Yes. And that's your birthright. It's your birthright. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to give to anybody to do it. And that, as soon as you start saying stuff like that to a giver, and you're like, no, don't give your supplements away to other people, or no, that's boundary, don't do that for other people. And they're like, oh, that makes me a selfish person. No, it's not selfish. So there's a whole retraining going on there, isn't it?
Yes.
So in summary, most adults don't realize most of their emotional responses in adulthood. By the way, like, events that happen to us in adulthood, they're often defined by what happened in childhood. So, when we get rejected by a romantic partner, how we respond to that is often, if we have conditional love for ourselves, we're not going to cope with that very well, someone else rejecting us, right? So have a huge stress response to that, or a job failure. Have a job failure with somebody who's an achiever type, they're going to be devastated by that, versus somebody who has a condition and feels their essence is love and self-love. So they don't, they kind of bounce back and go, well, that didn't work out. I'll try something else, and they bounce back fast. So it's dealing with these kind of core issues. So the childhood sets the bar for your adult resilience to the inevitable stresses in life. Most health practitioners aren't ACE aware, and they kind of assess stress very superficially. Go and do yoga, go and do breathing exercises. Mm-hmm. Okay, really? It's why, if you're not getting anywhere with a client, there's some people, it can make a big difference just getting them to do stress reduction stuff. But for others, they might actually need to go and do some digging and know themselves better. Recommendations are often inadequate. The subjective landscape and history of the patient, it could be good to look at it. So final section here, what can we do to address this in clinical practice in with your clients? Just as an overall summary here, essentially what we're trying to do with our clients and patients, because we want to get into rest, digest, detoxify, which is the healing state. The healing state means they're going to recover from any of the illnesses they have, or lose weight. If they're in a chronic state of stress, all that weight is going onto the digestive area. So that's the reason we're trying to resolve the trauma, is so that they're in rest, digest, detoxify, as opposed to fight, flight, which is where they're constantly living probably most of the time with all the detrimental side effects of that. Mm-hmm. Now, you don't have to train in multiple modalities to do work with clients. It's your awareness that counts. So it's be able to know, like looking at a patient going, or a client and going, okay, this is a massive attachment trauma issue going on. This might be a referral. Or, you can go so far within your boundaries of what you're trained to do. But it's knowing when you're kind of like, okay, I'm not going to get anywhere with this client if we don't go there, or I don't get them additional help in this area. So you don't suddenly sort of have to start training in all modalities. You could start partnering up with somebody who works on emotional trauma for a living, for example. So that's just putting people at ease, like, it doesn't rule out how you're working at the moment, and you don't suddenly have to go and do a 3-year degree in psychology to actually get results with your health, as a health coach. So the top next thing I always say to people is go and research and explore your own ACEs, personality type, and go look at your own attachment history. It'll change your life, and you will be so much of a better coach for doing it. You'll have tools and resources coming out of your ears if you do this kind of work, and you'll just be you'll have raving fan clients if you do this work. And you're just things that you couldn't see about other people, like the world changes around you. You'll see people differently, you'll see yourself differently, and you'll be able to identify things in your patients just by talking to them, just how they interact with you, just like how they fill out a questionnaire and what they expect in the timings they expect with you. Achiever types are crazies. They expect everything yesterday. Anxiety types like worried of everything you've told them, So if you don't know about that there's actually an attachment issue going on there and it's, an Enneagram type, you can learn. People tell you who they are in the first 5 minutes of meeting them. Somebody said that. People tell you who they are in the first 5 minutes. And if you've done your own research on yourself, this would be, this works. You'll have a major impact with your clients. If you want to start bringing in these types of questions, sometimes quite sensitive issues, talking about ACEs and things like this, patient or your client education is key. So you obviously want to let people know why you would be asking this type of thing. So things like if you do a podcast or if you have a blog site or if you have handouts that you give to clients, have an article on ACEs and say, did you know that all this trauma in childhood is linked with all these chronic complex illnesses in adulthood? Give them something. Say, does that resonate? Is that interesting to you? And then you can slowly, if you've got a good rapport, good relationship, most of your clients are actually, most of my clients are dying to talk about this stuff. I mean, some people don't want to very formal setting in like a doctor's office. I don't think that's probably one of the least times somebody's going to say to somebody they have no rapport with, like, oh, I was, sexually abused as a child. But they often will with a trusted, high rapport connection, more so than they will do with somebody in a white coat. Mm-hmm. So you can actually have a very powerful role here in kind of helping people to, they might talk about something they've never talked about to anybody before, and you might be the trusted confidant. So then what you want to do is, you've got a choice. You can either, if you notice and you start bringing in, so first of all, patient education, make sure they know why you're asking, start the conversation, and then you can say, hey, do you want to assess for this? Should we see if this is impacting what you're doing? Because this could improve your outcome. Then you've got some questionnaires I'll run through that you can run through with them, and then you could discuss that with them. Then you'll want to if someone's got major attachment trauma and you know that it's beyond your skill set, you'll want to just know, who can I refer to? So you could build a network of practitioners that you're working with, build up provider teams, or you might be a part of a provider team where somebody else is doing, a medical thing, someone else is doing bioenergetics, and you're the kind of the health coach side. So, it's working as a network. By the way, some people do want to train in some emotional trauma release techniques. You could, Mark Carmen is trained in EFT. If that makes your heart sing, so you do want to go and learn some emotional trauma release techniques like EFT, NLP, things like that. If it makes your heart sing, do it. Don't just do it for another certificate on the wall. If you can see yourself working like that with clients, fantastic. Probably the most important thing though is your compassionate, non-judgmental, empathic rapport skills, that you're going to be wanting to have total acceptance and non-judgmental attitude to your patient. And that's, if you don't think, if in doubt and you don't think you should go somewhere with a client that you don't think it's quite right to ask them, or you're not sure about your own skill set, if in doubt, don't do it. But if it's like, okay, I've got a good relationship, they're talking. I mean, I get people who just email me all the time saying, I've got 10 ACEs and this, and this, can you treat me? But only because I'm big on the education. I mean, I get people all the time saying, oh my God, you told me to read this book and I listened to your summit, cried all the way through. Mm-hmm. Can you take me on? So, so there's some practical tips. Final pointers. This is a great book, Childhood Disrupted, if you're interested in the science, by Donna Jackson Nakazawa. She's the only book that's out there really about ACEs. Mm-hmm. The link here is where you can get an ACE score. I've got the extended ACE score on my website, which you can, turn into your own thing, and it's on there if you want the extended one. The Enneagram, I actually recommend this book, and the Enneagram Institute are just the kind of the best ones out there. They have an online Enneagram test that costs $12. It's actually more important to actually explore the types and have your clients start to look into all of that, rather than just doing the questionnaire as well, as you probably know. In terms of attachment assessment, there's actually, because the adult attachment interview is like intense and it takes ages to do and so on, what a lot of researchers are using are experiences in close relationship scale. That's a link there to the free questionnaire. It's fascinating to start going to this with your clients as well. You'll change their lives and make them realize things that they just went, oh my God, I've been a codependent my whole life. Oh my God, I'm married to a narcissist. What does that say about your attachment styles? And by the way, that's going to affect all your other areas as well. Brilliant book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, about how avoidant types are attracted to the anxiety types. codependents are attracted to narcissists like moths to a flame. The Human Magnet Syndrome, it's Ross Rosenberg. It's an outstanding book. Attached, there's the questionnaires in there as well about attachment styles in romantic relationships that's come from childhood. This Parenting from the Inside Out is an amazing book, and they have an adapted adult interview questionnaire, and that you can get, and it's in that book. And I actually use that one with my clients as well when it's appropriate. It requires the client writing a lot about their history, and you can soon, it's cathartic even than writing that. But if you go online and put Dan Siegel Adult Attachment Questionnaire, linking to that book, it's actually a PDF, and you can, sort of use some form of that if you actually want people to go into looking at their own childhood, or you can just assess with their adult relationships there. The good news is we can change our brains, we can change genetic expression, we can change our neural pathways. I have a whole set of what I call that you'll want to be recommending clients that have had trauma and stress, reset rituals. Very important. It's just learning to relax and doing it every single day, and it becomes a way of life. 20 minutes twice a day. The big four: meditation, yoga, tai chi, qigong, are the ones with the most research, but it could be anything. It's just what works for the client. Maybe they love doing saunas, and that's their thing that gets them into the healing state. Breathing exercise, it could be sleep, naps, sunbathing, hobbies, massage, grounding, anything which is non-competitive. No space for self-judgment or achieving at it, or getting anxious about it. Just total relaxation, because we've had the opposite message with trauma for a lifetime. So we have to think all those minutes now as you're going to need to sort of reverse that. So it's whatever works for the client. But it needs to be, and it's not something you do for 6 months and then you've recovered. Life is too stressful for that. It's like, this is a way of life. Integrate it. Now you do this going forward, and it can change you forever. If the trauma was early, it was intense, and a person is not able to meditate, for example, you'll find people can't, they actually just can't sit there, or they still have symptoms and issues that are persisting despite those reset rituals, maybe time to refer. And I've got a list there of, these are some of the common, increasing research, these types of therapies really work. There's some amazing therapies out there. And you have to be careful about the type of therapist that you get. Sometimes you're going to need to shop around.
Yes.
But the therapies do work. What I've done, I'm just coming to the last few slides here. I've got a free ebook that I'm offering if people want to download that. It's on the last slide. The free book, I go into detail with links to all of those different types of resources, like what they are, where you can find out about them, and just sort of websites. So it was too much to put in a kind of slideshow if you want to learn more about it. We couldn't cover everything in this webinar. This is just a quick summary that, look, the body doesn't differentiate between physical, emotional, chemical, electrical, or microbial stressors. So it's very important to take all the loads off the boat. Still doing things like home chemical cleanups, electromagnetic cleanup, diet, lifestyle, address endogenous sources of stress. Those things are all important. We're not going to throw out the work you're doing on biochemistry. We're just also thinking about, we need to address how much of this is emotional stress as well. Last two slides, final tips. I talk about becoming a healer, because if you heal your own trauma, if you do your own work, you can just be in the presence of somebody and heal them. And that's based on the work of heart math, where we have an electromagnetic field around the heart, and it tends to synchronize with people around us. So there's a lot of really good coaches and kind of doctors out there, and the ones that are really amazing, they've got a vibe about them where they're getting amazing results with clients, and clients are like feeling better as soon as they walked in the door, right? Before you've prescribed a single supplement or a dietary change. And I think it's very much, there's a presence, it's like when somebody's resolved and they've got a clear energy field, they're self-loving, just being in their presence it could change the other person's field, where they come away and going, I just had a dose of something that felt really good and clear and happy. And so that's being a healer versus, a lot of nutritionists, functional medicine practitioners, doctors are more like technicians. So I'm like, be a healer. It's much more powerful. It's more fun as well. And you'll radiate. You'll start radiating.
I have to give you a compliment real quick. When I posted this information, I don't remember which group it was or even who said it, but it stuck out in my mind. She said something about just looking at your picture. There was something about your picture, about, it just gave her a sense of peace, or something like that. And it just, and I think that's true. I truly believe that, you know, when you come across someone that radiates that kind of energy, there's a feeling that comes from them. I'm very much a believer in that energy as well. I love the Heart Math Institute, and I love the heart mapping and all of those things. And I found that even put my son on the heart math thing and watched him just shift and change as he did it too. I just think it's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. When you start emanating essentially love, you start emanating that, people can't put their finger on it, but there's some, they know it's a real thing. It's a real thing that changes biology. So, yeah, this is good fun. It's like giving the secrets to the secrets to the kingdom here about how to be a highly successful, client. A coach. There's things that aren't being spoken about that make all the difference. So this is my sort of final pointers on here. Instead of learning more and more and more about less and less in biochemistry, consider, go and do an Enneagram course or, an energy medicine thing. Like, don't just look at biochemistry. It's the kind of thing I tend to say to a lot of the functional medicine community, because I'm really working on getting them to expand their mind. I call it the unquantified self, like the subjective state of ourselves and our patients and our clients. It's like the final undiscovered country. It's the thing that we're still not assessing, we haven't really been testing for in health. And it's like there's no justification whatsoever to not be assessing for this. And when somebody clears emotional trauma, their energy improves, their health changes, they feel amazing, they look amazing. And this is what I saw in the clinic working with clients where I was doing nutritional therapy, and all of my clients were being co-treated by somebody using NLP. We were looking at all that side. It was humbling as a nutritionist, because I was like, oh my God, that person's IBS has gone away, their sleep improved, and it wasn't me, it was the psychology. Yeah. So, know that you can create amazing changes. That's the ebook, where I've gone through sort of research, there's more sort of detail in there. And if anybody wants to email me with questions that you don't get to answer now, there's my email address there as well. That's it.
Awesome. Okay. So now I want to say a couple things, because as you were talking and you were hitting on some things that were super, they resonated with me. So I want to say, where you said that education is key, that is absolutely 100% the first step of what I teach coaches in how to coach their clients: educate them, prepare them, and then watch them to take action. So when you said that about the education, don't you feel like when we know more and we know better, it's almost like you can't unknow it? When you know something like this can be affecting you personally, you can't just put that away in your pocket and pretend it doesn't exist. It never goes away until you address it. Don't you believe that?
I think education can be for like 50% of the recovery. I get people emailing me all the time. I had somebody just comment on a blog post that I did where they said, I am 100% better than I was just by listening to you talking on summits and reading the articles you write, that it made more of a difference than week in, week out counseling for a year. Yes. So that education piece, and powerful education where I use like data to really bring it home to people, like, show the stats and things. So people, like you said, they just, wow, you can't unknow that. It's reality. So yes. Yeah, the education piece, it may be 30% of the part of the recovery is like, wow, now you know. Yes. So, and it could lead to even complete recovery if somebody just goes, oh my God, I have that pattern. That comes from that. Oh my God, it comes from that. I'm not gonna feel shame every time that person does that anymore, because that's not me. It was what happened to me as a child. I'm going to change this behavior, and they can recover just through awareness.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. And I will say this, now that I've gone through these slides, like I studied your site. I've done the Enneagram. We actually have an Enneagram conference up in Nashville. I passed the other night while I was driving down the road with my son, and I was like, oh my gosh, how did I miss that? But I've done so much of the work with the heart math and the EMDR and the therapy of my own. I almost want to reverse, my list of the foundations of health, because I just added trauma in as what I believe we should be doing with our clients too. The sleep, the whole food, the stress perception, safe movement, and fun. And then I added the, addressing trauma on there, not as a last thing we should address, but I almost feel like I need to tuck that right at the top of the list, because it affects so many of the other things that we are working on as health coaches, right? It's just,
I know a lot of people. When I talk about the data and share it and make people aware, most people have come back to me and said, this is the most important talk ever. Or and a friend of mine who's a practitioner, like, he said, here's the 8 causes of illness, and he's changed emotional trauma to be at the top.
That's what I'm
So
thinking.
it does change. Yeah, it's actually, if you think about it, all the way from the impact on stress, the level of attachment trauma, the ACE study is one of the most important studies done in medicine, and then when somebody is ill, like how they respond psychologically to their own illness, also the relational impact of being the client practitioner interaction as well, which is a relational social thing. The social, emotional, relational, subjective stuff, it's bigger than everything else, right?
It is.
It just affects everything. Beliefs, your relations with others, the therapist. If you put all into that category, it's the thing that has the biggest impact.
It does. And, I think this is really powerful too, because when I was, going through the art of discovery, what was wrong with me, what was going on with my health, I had undiagnosed health problems for almost a decade. I finally found out that it was, Hashimoto's autoimmunity. I went to I went to 21 doctors total, really. But there was one that I went to that said to me, I said, so what do we do about it? Like, you're the specialist. What do we do about it? And she said, you can't do anything about it. You're going to take this pill for the rest of your life. Eventually your thyroid will die, and that's going to be it. And I said, wait a minute. I'm going to unhear everything you just said to me, because what you just gave me was like a death sentence. How dare you try and put your belief onto me, and I still remember that woman and that moment today when I didn't accept that as my fate. I don't believe that's true, but how many people take that belief into their biology, and that's how they live their life. They believe what someone in authority tells them. They then carry that through, and they get sicker and sicker and sicker. It's terrible.
Yeah, and just speaking to that point about, we do have to break out of this authority thing where we give our power away to authority. The American Psychiatric Association, it took them years just to recognize PTSD and put that into their DMV, their diagnostic criteria, their Bible. They still don't recognize developmental trauma. It doesn't exist to them. If you go to see a psychiatrist, they won't assess for ACEs, they won't assess for attachment trauma, they won't assess for developmental trauma. It's not covered in insurance, and they don't recognize it. And so it's like, and yet you've got people like Bessel van der Kolk saying, he thinks that half of Congress probably have dissociative disorder because it took him that long to get PTSD. Like, you're sending people to war, you don't think that's going to emotionally affect them? Okay, dissociative disorder, meaning they're either psychopaths or narcissists.
Right.
Actually, and they're not connecting to empathy and feeling. And unfortunately, those types of people are attracted to power. So you've got to be really careful who you're giving your power away to, and connect with your own heart. And like you did when that doctor said that to you, said, I don't accept that diagnosis, and I'm, and if we look at the revolution that's happened with thyroid issues, all because they wanted us to believe that it's just like, yeah, this thing's there, no idea how it came there, you're going to be on drugs for the rest of your life. And it was people like you and Isabella Wentz, the rest of them, were going, no, we can go to the root cause. There's causes, that means you can reverse it. So yeah, it's the same. You've got to kind of, there are world-class doctors and researchers that are doing this work, and at the highest level of medicine, it's not yet recognized. But who wants to wait? They'll recognize it eventually, maybe 20 years. Who wants to wait 20 years for something that all the major doctors, like the world leading expert in trauma, Van der Kolk, have already said, of all the traumas that I see, it's all relational trauma and attachment trauma. So, get self-education.
Yeah. I have one question I promised I would read, and then I'm going to look real quick, and I know we're running close on, we're over on time, but it's okay. Real quick, I wanted to ask you this. Eileen sent this ahead of time. And so she said she's done a lot of work on childhood trauma that she experienced from both parents. One of the things her practitioners helped her understand is the negative wiring in her brain as a child. It makes her suspicious of people's motives and caring and so on. Makes her gravitate towards negative experiences and concepts, which you've talked about here. She's saying, now that I'm seeing that, I'm able to stop myself a bit. But what are your thoughts on the brain rewiring and brain neuroplasticity, I believe is what she's saying. Can you talk a little bit about the wiring real quick? Just like, how is that through the therapies that you just talked about, the EMDR, the NLP, the tapping and things like that?
Yes. So part of it will be like a daily practice of relaxation. So we're literally, like a meditation where can be really powerful, where you're literally, you can feel the stress in the brain and you're not responding. When it cycles into a chronic stress response, and then you build the neural pathways, is you'll get a sort of stress response coming and then respond to the stress with more stress. So that's how it kind of continues. So at some point you've got to break the pattern, which means you're going to feel the stressor coming up and don't respond. Feel the stressor coming up, don't respond. Feel the stressor, don't respond. And that's how you'll retrain the neural pathways. Now, there's different ways you could do that. So that the sort of the cheapest sort of lifestyle ways of those things, those reset rituals.
Yep.
Sometimes if it's things like EMDR are fantastic for where you have specific incidents that you can remember and work on. So when you clear one level, often it will go deeper and you'll think of another incident. But the more you can get a specific incident, yes, things like EMDR will help. Also things like NLP stop techniques, like NLP techniques where it's a pattern break. So you do a chronic pattern of worry, stress. And NLP, you can actually come in and you stop, you come into the present moment and you break the pattern. You do a pattern break every time you do it. That's kind of quite work intensive. It's another way of doing it. A lot of chronic fatigue patients who are totally stressed out have to do, like, I call it the sledgehammer approach if you're doing it that way. That's another way. But one other thing I should mention is neurofeedback. Now, neurofeedback is amazing. It's like meditation on steroids.
Ooh,
yeah.
love that.
And I sent out an email because Bessel van der Kolk, I mention him a lot because I follow a lot of his work at the moment, but he sent an email out and a webinar saying he thinks that neurofeedback may be the top treatment protocol for trauma in childhood. He said he's seeing better results than he gets with EMDR, talking therapy, somatic therapies like the Peter Levine work, over and above everything. So sort of 20 sessions of neurofeedback. That's something I actually want to go and do, because you've got people like Dave Asprey, the Silicon Valley extraordinaire, Bulletproof Coffee CEO. He actually he's a biohacker, so he's looking at for performance. He is on his website, the top thing he's ever done, he says, is neurofeedback, and so he has this week-long course for $15,000 that you can go with him. And I've got an article on my website called "Is Neurofeedback the Top Treatment?" And I would recommend looking at that, because I talk about all the ways you could look into that for neurofeedback. So that's literally is something that so makes the brainwave so coherent. It has such a coherent effect on the whole biology. And all it is, it's that feedback. You've got either a noise or a sound coming back that you can look at. And if you're in a stress state, a noise or a sound will come to you showing you're in the stress state. When you go into a calm state, the noise or the visuals change. So you're just getting hyper detailed response back. That's the biofeedback part of it. But
I'm looking for someone. I am going to get off this webinar and get on there and look in Nashville to find somebody, because I've been doing the EMDR and it's been really, really helpful. But like you just said about the specifics, it's really helpful to have a specific thing, that you can work on with the EMDR. And I think I've worked through most of those. So I'm going to look at the neurofeedback, but people are blowing us up with questions. So let me just try and combine this real quick. Yes, Mary Louise, I am saying EMDR, eye movement desensitization. What's the R again?
Reprocessing.
Yes. Okay. But they're asking, can people with bipolar disorder or, schizophrenia or any of these mental disorders, can they actually reverse those conditions and problems by working on these types of things? Is that possible?
I would say, obviously, with somebody with a diagnosed mental disease at that level, yes, they could, if they are working with a professional with things like neurofeedback. In fact, van der Kolk again actually says that things like bipolar disorder is caused by developmental trauma. And so if you address the root cause, which is you're getting to the attachment trauma and the developmental issues, there's actually, on that article that I sent out, there's an amazing case study of a woman with tremendously awful childhood, and and she came out bipolar and self-harming. She was, hurting herself and everything. And she ended up doing 20 seconds of neurofeedback. Actually, she worked on it over a few years, and now she's like graduated head of the nursing college, and she's in a happy, healthy relationship, totally recovered. So yes, these types of therapies, the in-depth stuff, can work. The interesting thing is, if developmental trauma disorder and attachment disorder were fully recognized by the Psychiatric Association, probably all those other diagnoses would no longer be, because it's all caused by developmental trauma, whether it's bipolar, psychosis. It doesn't come from nowhere because the genetics expressed chemicals in a certain way in the brain. No, the way the brain develops and the imbalances came because the child's usually had, it could be ambient relational developmental trauma. It wasn't, or it's been sexual abuse and things like this. So the understanding in the psychiatric profession, the official psychiatric sort of profession, is deplorable. It's crazy.
It is. And it's, that goes along with Kelly Brogan when she talks about the brain and depression. And I mean, like, if I thought too much about some of the things that are being done to people and what's happening in our world today, it would make me insane to not be able to change it just like that. It's really frustrating, but it's people like you that are out there educating and passionate and putting everything behind these types of things that's going to make that shift. And then, we're like your little minions carrying it out into the world and, doing what we can from here. And I just can't say enough when I talk to my coaches and I teach my students and I talk to my community, I don't think that we all need to get, completely educated and certified in how to do this. It's, it can be overwhelming, but we have people like Niki at our disposal here to refer people to so that they can get the help that they need. So being able to even be just a person that can carry this information to our clients is hugely powerful and helpful, seriously. And it's the only reason I found you is because I started doing my own childhood trauma work and started studying and read the book by Donna and did all of that, where it was just pinging at me like, this is too big to not make a part of what we're doing in this coaching community today. And that's what brought you here. So one of the questions is also, where can people, if they do want to take this further and get certified, and this is a calling that they have, where can they go and how can they do that?
It depends. I would say, in terms of if you actually want to train in a modality, I would first go and experience the modality, perhaps working on yourself, your own trauma. So, if you get really into, some people might go and do neurofeedback, think it's absolutely amazing, cure people, like their family and friends will get cured by it, and then decide to become a neurofeedback practitioner alongside a health coach. That's totally viable. Other people, I think you can't do EMDR. There's certain restrictions about what qualifications you have to do that. But EFT, there's tons of courses on EFT and NLP. Again, like, experience it for yourself. And if it resonates with you and you love it, then, kind of look into that. There's another type of therapy, a lot of body work out there, like somatic healing therapies. This is Peter Levine, who wrote the book, Waking the Tiger. It's a body work, different again. It's not even sort of so much psychology. It's more working with body. If that resonates with you, that's another way of doing it. Energy medicine comes into this as well. I chose to bring in like energetic scanning and using kind of working at the informational energetic level because it overlaps with kind of emotional stuff. I brought that in because I like to work remotely with my clients. So I could end up training in a bit of the talk therapy, the psychotherapy side, but as long as it's, it depends how committed you are. I'm not like into doing 3-year degree in something else. I've already got like too many certifications. So it's, it's really try it out for yourself. Try the different modalities. You might fall in love with one of them. Love the teacher that you've got who's doing it. You might meet an amazing teacher, therapist who just inspires you and you go, I want to be like that. And that will, it's just however you got into do your health coaching. How did you get into health coaching? So think about it in the same way.
Yeah. And there's organizations
there's
for everything. There's organizations for Reiki. There's organizations for kinesiology. There's organizations for everything out there. So like she's saying, whatever hits you and feels good to you and lights you up, go out and find out what they offer and how you can get certified in that modality. Right. Last question.
And you could, go ahead. You could business partner, by the way. I know people who are setting up businesses where, I set up a business, but I was a nutritionist and I had my business partner was a psychology practitioner. So, and that it's another way of working. You could be part of a provider team where you don't necessarily, train in that yourself, but your business partner with somebody who covers that side. That's very viable as well. So
that's a great suggestion. Okay. So the last question we're going to ask here before we let you go on and get on with your day is by Jennifer. She's saying, are you aware of any research using, and I don't know if I'll say this right, but ayahuasca healing? Do you know what that is?
Ayahuasca. Yeah.
Ayahuasca.
So that is ayahuasca. It's a medicinal plant. is plant medicine. I think, okay, it's illegal in the US, so just make that clear. Like, you can't actually recommend clients to do that. Obviously, it goes on. So a lot of people go down to Costa Rica or Peru to do it. But there have been reports, there's plenty of reports that it can create quite profound experiences and emotional healing. So what these plant medicines do is they create altered states of consciousness where you basically would access that untraumatized child. Basically, you can access states of awareness that's of unconditional love. And if you've never experienced it before, you can certainly you can have a reference point now of like, oh, that's what it's like to feel love, because a lot of people have never even had that. So you can, and for some people the change that the experience causes them in them is permanent. Not with everybody, and I guess I'd say the downside of ayahuasca is you tend to get this kind of intense short-term experience, but if it doesn't, most of it doesn't integrate into a long-term change in behavior and expression. So with that, it's more of a long-term kind of program you want. You know, you're not suddenly going to resolve all childhood trauma, unlikely, by doing a weekend of ayahuasca. It could certainly give you some altered experiences, some peak experiences that you can reference, and now that you know that those things exist. It's a bit like having a spiritual awakening. But then you'll have a spiritual awakening, and then you'll spend the next 10 years integrating that state into a continual way of being. So you can have a state change, it's temporary. What we want is to bring that state to become a shift in consciousness that's permanent and integrated. And that takes more, you need to set up your lifestyle, the people you hang around with, and probably become more cognitively aware. You could become a little bit destabilized by having an ayahuasca experience. So yeah, so just so that people are aware, it's not something you can recommend to your patients. Certainly not. Yes. So
I got
but yeah, it is an interesting, ayahuasca it's exploding interest in it. So
wow, that's interesting. I've never heard of that before. I thought I'd heard of just about everything, but that's new to me for sure. Oh my gosh, this has been amazing. We could talk for 2 hours about this stuff because there's so many pieces. It's almost like I see in my mind when I'm thinking about trauma now, I think about trauma as like a hub and all of these things branching off of it as problems and solutions and everything. It's almost like mind blowing. And people are asking, can they get access to your slides?
Yes, I can sort that out. I could work out that with you.
That would be amazing, because if you were able to give me a PowerPoint, of course it's branded, no one's able to use it for anything other than education. There's just so much information on each slide that is, I know people are wondering, like, what was that list again? And probably don't want to watch the whole webinar to find that one list that spoke to them. So it would be really, really great if you could do that.
Yeah, sure. Because I also didn't, my book yet isn't updated with just that attachment trauma stuff. So if I give you the slides, you'll have the attachment trauma. Everything else is in the book and more, because I had more detail in there. So yes, sure. We'll get a PDF version sent to you. I'll pop that to you on email, and then I'll leave it to you.
That'd be great. Yes, absolutely. And then just as for everyone's information, of course, the replay will go out, and I will have all of Niki's information there so you guys can easily click and find her. And some of the books in there too. I'm going to have my my assistant go back and pull those book links out and put those in there as well, because I love that book by Donna. I have to tell you, I stayed awake past my normal go to bed time reading her book. I thought it was so amazing the way she went after fixing those problems. She just dove right in with so many different modalities. It was fascinating. I mean, even her stories about crawling up the stairs. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's she, and also just that how she's a science writer. I mean, that's funny. I was focused on the science section. The patient stories are really good in there as well for people to kind of relate their own stories to. But yeah, the actual, it was her, and there's a lady called Nadine Burke Harris, who's a pediatrician, who's got a TED talk, 20-minute TED talk, 3 or 4 million views on now, and she just knocks out some of that initial data. Like when she said that, that's what changed my world. When I saw that, I went, oh, that is what I've been doing for 10 years, and I have got to look into what she's talking about. And so she had a very powerful talk on it as well. But then that's where I explored all that data and went, wow, let's go deeper. And then there was all the attachment stuff, and so it's like this plethora of stuff that's being hidden and not talked about. And it's fantastic. I'm just, thank you so much for having me. And it's great that everyone, you know, has this opportunity to become ACE aware. And the most important thing is, like, you're going to change people's lives with this work in a way that you couldn't get to the same degree with other modalities. That, you know, you're going to help so many people. That's the most important thing. We're waking people up. That's essentially. I was going to say as the last point, slightly political. Yeah, awareness. Like, if you look at how bad people's childhoods are and how common it is, that helps to explain why the world is the way it is.
Oh my God!
Explains why governments are doing the way governments are, the way that people, why we have an insane world. You know, we would have more sanity if we dealt with our time with childhood trauma and wasn't dealing with so many disassociated.
I totally agree.
Kind of people who actually aren't connected to that. Yeah. So it's a very timely.
It is. It's very timely. And I think we're going to get there. So thank you so much again, Niki. It's just been wonderful having you, and really appreciate all of your dialogue going on the side here, guys. Lots of interesting information. I'll be sure to save the chat for you and post that in the Mentorship and Mastery group. And the replay will go out later today. And just thank you again so much. Thank you so much, Niki. It's wonderful having you.
Thank you, guys. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right. Have a great weekend,
everyone.
everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.